David Reed adjusted his headset for the third time that hour, trying to shake off the boredom that came with monitoring empty space. The overnight shift at Earth's deep space listening station meant 8 hours of watching screens that showed nothing but cosmic background noise. Most people thought his job was exciting, scanning the stars for signs of alien life. The reality was far less thrilling. He spent most nights fighting to stay awake while automated systems did all the real work. Then something changed. A pattern appeared on his screen that didn't match anything in the database. David sat up straight, his tiredness vanishing in an instant. The signal was coming from somewhere in the Cygnus arm, over 40 light-years away. It wasn't random noise. The transmission used mathematical sequences, prime numbers arranged in a way that couldn't be natural. "I need someone up here right now," David said into his communicator, his voice shaking slightly. Within minutes, his supervisor arrived, followed by 2 other technicians. They all stared at the same screen, watching as the computer tried to decode the signal. The translation came through in fragments. The words were broken, interrupted by static, but the meaning was clear enough to make everyone in the room go silent. Someone out there was calling for help. A colony was under attack. The message included coordinates and a desperate plea for anyone who could hear them to respond. Admiral Helen Voss received the report 3 hours later at military headquarters in Geneva. She was a tall woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her office walls were covered with maps of human space, showing the handful of colonies humanity had established since developing faster-than-light travel 15 years ago. She read the decoded message twice before calling an emergency meeting. The debate in the council chamber was heated. Scientists wanted to send a research vessel with diplomatic staff. They argued this was humanity's first contact with alien intelligence, a historic moment that required careful handling, but others disagreed. The military representatives pointed out that the message mentioned an attack. Whatever was happening out there involved violence, and sending unarmed scientists into a war zone would be suicide. "We don't know what we're flying into," said one council member. "This could be a trap, or it could be people dying while we sit here arguing," Admiral Voss replied. Her voice was calm but firm. "The message is 3 weeks old. If we wait any longer, there might be nothing left to save." The vote was close, but the decision was made. Earth would respond with a military fleet. The mission would be led by Admiral Voss herself, commanding the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet from the flagship Valiant, 12 warships in total, carrying enough firepower to handle whatever threat they might encounter. Robert Nash, the captain of the Valiant, gathered his senior officers in the briefing room the next day. He was younger than most captains, only 38, but he'd earned his position during the corporate wars that nearly tore humanity apart a decade ago. Those conflicts had taught Earth a harsh lesson about being unprepared for violence. "We're jumping into an active combat situation," Nash told his crew. "We have no intel about who's fighting or why. Rules of engagement are simple. Protect any civilians we find. Identify threats and neutralize them. We go in ready for anything." The weapons officer, a serious man named Frank Hayes, raised his hand. "What if both sides are hostile? What if we can't tell who needs help? Then we make our best judgment call," Nash answered. "That's why we're being sent instead of diplomats. Sometimes you don't have time to talk things through." The fleet spent 2 days preparing for the jump. Engineers checked every system twice. Medical bays were stocked for mass casualties. Marines loaded dropships with enough equipment to secure a small city. Everyone knew this mission could change everything. Humanity was about to announce its presence to the galaxy, and they were doing it with warships instead of peace offerings. David Reed watched the fleet depart from his monitoring station. He'd been given a commendation for discovering the signal, but he felt uneasy about how things had developed. He'd imagined first contact differently, with peaceful meetings and cultural exchanges. Instead, Earth was sending its most powerful weapons into the unknown. "I hope we're doing the right thing," he said to his supervisor. The older man shrugged. "We're doing the human thing. Someone called for help, so we're showing up. Whether that's right or wrong, we'll find out soon enough." The fleet entered FTL space, disappearing from Earth's sensors in a flash of blue light. They would travel for 5 days before reaching the coordinates from the distress signal. 5 days to prepare for whatever waited on the other side. 5 days before humanity learned it wasn't alone in the universe, and that the galaxy was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Admiral Voss stood alone in her ready room, looking at a photo of Earth on her desk. She'd fought in 2 wars to protect that blue planet. Now she was leading humanity's first expedition into truly unknown space. The responsibility felt heavier than any battle command she'd ever held. Whatever happened next would echo through history. Future generations would judge every decision she made in the coming days. She picked up the photo and studied it for a long moment before putting it away in a drawer. There was no point in second-guessing now. The choice was made, and the fleet was already halfway to its destination. The warning alarm started before anyone could even see the enemy. Christine Park, the scanner officer on the Valiant, noticed the debris field first. Pieces of destroyed spacecraft floated between the asteroids near a massive ringed gas giant. The metal was torn and melted, still warm enough to show up on thermal sensors. Whatever battle had happened here, it hadn't been long ago. "Admiral, we're detecting energy signatures from the third moon," Christine reported. Her fingers moved quickly across her console, bringing up visual feeds. The image on the main screen made several crew members gasp. A small settlement on the moon's surface was burning. Buildings collapsed under energy weapons fired from orbit. 3 ships hung in space above the colony, methodically destroying everything below them. The alien vessels looked nothing like human designs. They were sleek and curved, almost organic in appearance, with smooth hulls that seemed to shift colors in the light. Their weapons fired precise beams that cut through structures with surgical accuracy. There was something cold about the way they worked, systematic and emotionless. "Try to open a channel," Admiral Voss ordered. "All frequencies. Let them know we're here." The communications officer sent out greetings in every format Earth had developed for first contact scenarios, mathematical sequences, visual patterns, even simple audio tones. The alien ships didn't respond. They didn't even seem to notice the human fleet had arrived. They just continued their bombardment of the settlement below. Then something moved on the moon's surface. A small transport ship, clearly civilian, rose from behind a damaged building and tried to escape. It was slow and clumsy, probably overloaded with refugees. The alien warships turned their attention to it immediately. 3 precise shots turned the transport into an expanding cloud of debris and bodies. Robert Nash felt his jaw tighten. He'd seen a lot of violence in his career, but there was something particularly cruel about shooting down civilians trying to flee. He looked at Admiral Voss, waiting for orders. She was watching the same scene, her expression unreadable. "Battle stations," she said quietly. "All ships weapons free. Target those 3 vessels. They just fired on unarmed refugees. That makes them hostile." The Third Fleet spread out into attack formation. What happened next lasted only 8 minutes, but it felt like hours to everyone involved. Human railguns opened fire first, sending solid slugs of metal downrange at a significant fraction of light speed. The alien ships tried to evade, but they were designed for precision work, not fleet combat. Their shields couldn't handle the kinetic impact. The aliens finally responded, their beam weapons cutting across space toward the human ships. They were accurate, hitting target points on the hull with perfect aim. But their weapons seemed designed to disable rather than destroy. They cut through armor in specific places, trying to knock out engines or weapon systems. It was the tactical approach of someone who wanted to capture ships intact. Humanity didn't fight that way. Human doctrine was simple and brutal. Identify the threat, apply overwhelming force, eliminate the problem. The Third Fleet's missiles filled space with hundreds of warheads, saturating the enemy's ability to shoot them down. Explosions rippled across alien hulls. 2 of the 3 ships broke apart under the assault. The third tried to run but took critical damage to its engines. It drifted helplessly, leaking atmosphere. "Cease fire," Admiral Voss ordered. "Deploy ground teams to the moon. I want survivors rescued and that damaged ship secured for intelligence gathering." Frank Hayes led the Marine deployment, riding down in a drop ship through smoke and debris. The settlement was worse up close than it had looked from orbit. Buildings were collapsed into rubble. Bodies lay scattered in the streets, belonging to a species humanity had never seen before. They were roughly humanoid, but with features that were distinctly insect-like, with chitinous plates covering parts of their bodies and multiple arms. A group of survivors emerged from a collapsed building, carrying wounded. They froze when they saw the Marines, clearly terrified. Frank slowly removed his helmet, showing his human face. He raised his hands to show he wasn't holding a weapon. One of the aliens, larger than the others with more elaborate markings on its shell, stepped forward carefully. The translator device, the Alien War, started working after a moment, producing broken English through some kind of universal translation software. The alien's name was Kreen, and he was the settlement leader. What he told the Marines over the next hour painted a grim picture of the galaxy humanity had just entered. The attackers were called the Swarm Lords. They were an empire that had been expanding for centuries, conquering species after species. They always followed the same pattern: arrive at a colony, demand surrender, and if refused, destroy everything. They believed they were bringing order to the galaxy, incorporating lesser species into their perfect society. Back on the Valiant, intelligence teams examined the captured Swarm Lord ship. The technology was advanced in some ways, primitive in others. Their computers held star charts showing dozens of conquered systems, along with military reports and strategic planning documents. One of the analysts, a young officer named Paul Chen, noticed something disturbing about the pattern of expansion. "Admiral, you need to see this," Paul said, bringing up a map on the display. The Swarm Lord territory formed a growing sphere, but it wasn't expanding randomly. The conquered systems formed a path, a deliberate route through space. Paul traced the line forward. "If they keep following this pattern, they'll reach Earth's sector in less than 5 years." The briefing room went silent. Everyone understood what that meant. This wasn't just about saving some random aliens. Humanity had just made first contact with an expansionist empire that was heading directly toward Earth. The distress signal they'd answered had pulled them into someone else's war, a war they might not be able to avoid. Admiral Voss studied the map for a long time. "What's the crew status on all ships?" 4 wounded from debris impacts during deployment. "No deaths," came the report. "And the Talveri survivors?" That was what Kreen's species called themselves. 243 alive. They're requesting escort to their home system. They say there's a refugee rally point where hundreds of ships are gathering. Voss made her decision. "Set course for Talveri space. We're not leaving them behind." Captain Nash spoke up quietly. "Admiral, we should send a ship back to Earth, report what we've found." "We will. But first, we're going to see this through. Those people asked for help and we're going to deliver it." Nicole Ward had always been good with languages. She'd learned 7 human languages before joining the military, and had a natural talent for understanding how different cultures communicated. But working with Kreen was different from anything she'd experienced. The Talveri didn't just speak with words. Their body language, the way they moved their multiple arms, the patterns of color that shifted across their chitinous plates, all of it carried meaning. They sat together in a quiet room on the Valiant while the fleet traveled toward Talveri space. The journey would take a week at FTL speeds, giving Nicole time to improve the translation software and learn more about what humanity had stumbled into. Kreen was patient, repeating phrases and explaining concepts that didn't translate well into human languages. "The Swarm Lords believe in unity," Kreen explained, his translator working better now after Nicole's adjustments. "They think all species should join together under their guidance. They see themselves as bringing peace to a chaotic galaxy." "By force," Nicole said. "It wasn't a question. They always offer a choice first. Surrender peacefully and accept integration, or resist and be destroyed. Most species surrender. The Swarm Lords are very powerful. They have conquered 17 species over 300 years. Each conquered people adds to their strength." Nicole made notes on her tablet. "What about your people?" "The Talveri?" Kreen's color shifted to darker tones, which Nicole had learned indicated sadness or distress. "We tried to resist at first. We lost our homeworld. Now we run. We gather refugees and search for places the Swarm Lords haven't found yet. But they always find us eventually. That colony we found you at, how long had you been there?" 8 months. "We thought we were safe. The system had no valuable resources, nothing the Swarm Lords would want. We were wrong." Over the following days, Nicole spent hours with Kreen and other Talveri survivors, building a clearer picture of the galaxy. The Swarm Lords weren't mindless killers. They were methodical and organized. Their military operated under strict rules designed to minimize casualties on both sides. They used precise weapons to disable enemy ships rather than destroy them. They targeted infrastructure carefully to preserve valuable resources. In their own way, they were merciful. At least that's how they saw it. They gave species a chance to surrender. They didn't engage in torture or genocide. They simply demanded obedience, and if that obedience wasn't given, they removed the obstacle. What disturbed Nicole most was learning that this approach had worked remarkably well. Most species in the galaxy weren't particularly violent. When faced with a superior military force offering terms, Most chose survival over resistance. The Tal'Vari were unusual in their continued refusal to surrender, and it had cost them dearly. Paul Chen, meanwhile, was making discoveries of his own. The data recovered from the captured Swarmlord ship contained detailed military records going back decades. He spent his nights in the intelligence section, correlating the information with human astronomical surveys and building a comprehensive map of Swarmlord territory. The pattern became clearer the more he studied it. The Swarmlords weren't just expanding randomly or even following resource-rich systems. They were moving deliberately along ancient stellar trade routes that human astronomers had identified as being artificially created millions of years ago. Someone had once connected these star systems with jump gates or something similar, long before humanity or any current species existed. "They're looking for something," Paul told Admiral Voss during a briefing. He displayed his map on the main screen. "Every expansion push follows these ancient routes. They're searching along a path that leads to this region here." He highlighted an area of space marked on human charts as the Dead Zone, a cluster of systems with unusual energy readings that no one had explored yet. "What's in the Dead Zone?" Voss asked. "No one knows. Human probes never made it that far, but according to Tal'Vari records, it's where an advanced civilization used to exist. They called themselves the Architects. They vanished about 50,000 years ago, leaving behind ruins and technology that no one can understand. And the Swarmlords want this technology. That's my theory. They're not just building an empire. They're searching for something the Architects left behind." The implications were troubling. If the Swarmlords were hunting ancient super technology, that meant they weren't satisfied with their current power level. They wanted something more, something that would make them even more dangerous. The fleet arrived at the refugee rally point on the 8th day. The sight that greeted them was both inspiring and heartbreaking. Hundreds of ships filled the space around a large asteroid cluster. Most were civilian vessels, converted colony ships and transports. A few were warships, though their weapons looked primitive compared to human or Swarmlord technology. This was what remained of Tal'Vari civilization. No homeworld, no permanent colonies. Just a fleet of refugees constantly running from system to system. Other species were mixed in too. Nicole identified at least 4 different alien races among the gathered ships, all of them apparently fleeing from the Swarmlords. Admiral Voss opened communications with the refugee fleet leaders. The meeting that followed involved multiple species trying to communicate through barely compatible translation systems. A Tal'Vari elder named Shen served as spokesperson for the group. She was old even by Tal'Vari standards, her plates weathered and scarred from decades of running. "You are the humans," Shen said through the translator. "Kreen told us you came to answer our distress signal." We didn't believe him. "No one has ever come to help us before." "We're here now," Voss replied. "What's your situation?" Shen explained that the refugees had been gathering here for months, planning to move to a new system far from Swarmlord space. But scouts had detected a Swarmlord hunting fleet moving in their direction. 47 ships, including several of their largest warships. The fleet would arrive within 2 days. "We cannot fight them," Shen said. "Our weapons are not strong enough." We were preparing to scatter and run again, hoping some of us would survive. Captain Nash studied the tactical display. 47 enemy ships against the Third Fleet's 12. The odds were terrible. Even if human weapons were more effective than Tal'Vari technology, they'd be outnumbered 4-1. "We should send a message to Earth," Nash suggested privately to Voss. "Request reinforcements." "There's no time. Even if Earth sent every available ship, they'd arrive weeks after the Swarmlords do. Then we should evacuate as many refugees as possible and retreat. We can save some of them." Voss looked at the display showing hundreds of refugee ships, thousands of families, children who'd never known a real home. "And leave the rest to die?" "Admiral, we can't save everyone. That's not a failure, that's just reality." She was quiet for a long moment. "You're probably right. But I didn't come all this way to choose which families live and which ones die. We're going to hold this position." "Against 47 ships?" "Yes, we'll use the asteroid field for cover. Set up defensive positions. Make them fight for every inch of space." She turned to face Nash directly. "I know it's a long shot. But running isn't why we're here." Brian Mills had been an engineer on cargo haulers before joining the military. He knew how to fix anything with moving parts and could improvise solutions with whatever materials were available. Now he found himself leading a desperate effort to turn an asteroid field into a death trap. for an enemy fleet that would arrive in less than 36 hours. "We're going to mine every approach vector," Brian explained to his team of engineers from across the fleet. "Every torpedo we have, every missile we can spare, we hide them in the asteroids. When the swarm lords come through, they'll hit a wall of explosives." The work was exhausting and dangerous. Engineers in spacesuits moved between asteroids, attaching magnetic clamps and setting up remote triggers. The Third Fleet carried plenty of weapons, but spreading them across such a large area meant each trap would only get one shot. They'd have to count on surprise and good timing to make it work. The Tal'Vari watched the preparations with a mixture of hope and disbelief. They'd been running for so long that the idea of making a stand seemed almost foreign. Some of their ships had weapons, old defensive guns that had been designed for fighting pirates, not military fleets. Shen insisted they be allowed to help despite Admiral Voss's concerns. "We will fight," the old Tal'Vari said firmly. "Even if our weapons are weak, we will not hide while others defend us. That is not who we are." Voss eventually agreed, positioning the armed refugee ships in protected positions where they could provide supporting fire without being exposed to the main enemy force. It wasn't much, but it gave the Tal'Vari something they'd been missing. A sense of agency, of fighting back instead of just running. Captain Nash positioned the Third Fleet's ships in 3 groups. The destroyers formed the forward line, hiding in the asteroids where they could ambush ships that came through. The cruisers stayed back in a reserve position, ready to reinforce wherever the line was weakest. The Valiant held the center, its heavy guns ready to engage any enemy ships that broke through the first defensive layer. The Swarm Lord fleet arrived exactly when the scouts had predicted. 47 ships emerged from FTL in tight formation, their organic-looking hulls gleaming in the light of the distant star. They moved with perfect coordination, maintaining precise distances from each other. It was beautiful in a way, like watching a school of fish move as one organism. A transmission came from the lead Swarm Lord vessel. The translation software turned it into flat, emotionless English. "This is Vessel Commander Thorol of the Swarm Lords. All ships in this system are ordered to stand down and prepare for integration. Resistance will be met with appropriate force. You have 1 hour to comply." Admiral Voss opened a channel in response. She kept her voice calm and professional. "This is Admiral Helen Voss of the United Earth Fleet. The people under our protection have declined your offer. I suggest you withdraw." There was a pause, as if Thorol was surprised to receive a response at all. "You are an unknown species. Your interference in Swarm Lord operations is not advisable. Withdraw now and you will not be harmed. Not happening. If you want these refugees, you'll have to go through us." Another pause, longer this time. "Very well. Your choice is noted." The Swarm Lord fleet began its advance, moving forward in that same perfect formation. They came slowly at first, their sensors scanning the asteroid field for threats. They were being careful, which meant the human preparations hadn't gone unnoticed. Good. Caution would slow them down. The first mines detonated when the leading Swarm Lord ships entered the kill zone. Asteroids exploded, sending shrapnel and nuclear fire across space. 2 enemy ships took direct hits and were destroyed immediately. 3 more were damaged, their shields overloaded by the unexpected assault. The perfect formation broke apart as ships took evasive action. That's when the human destroyers attacked. They came from behind the asteroids like wolves, firing railguns and launching missiles at close range. The Swarm Lords tried to respond, their precise beam weapons cutting through space, but the humans wouldn't stay still. They fired and moved, using the asteroids for cover, never giving the enemy a clean shot. Vessel Commander Thorol adjusted his tactics quickly. He split his fleet into smaller groups, sending them through different paths in the asteroid field. It was a sound strategy that would prevent the humans from concentrating their fire. But it also meant his ships lost the advantage of their coordinated formations. The battle turned into a chaotic mess of individual engagements. Human ships darted between asteroids, taking shots and retreating before the Swarm Lords could respond effectively. The enemy's precise weapons were designed for open space combat where accuracy mattered. Here, among the spinning rocks and debris, that precision was less useful than rapid-fire suppression, but the Swarm Lords had numbers on their side. For every enemy ship the humans destroyed, 2 more took its place. Slowly, inevitably, they pushed forward. The human destroyer North Star took critical damage and had to withdraw. The destroyer Pacific was destroyed completely when 3 Swarm Lord ships caught it in a crossfire. The crew of 54 died in seconds. Frank Hayes fought in his own way, leading Marine boarding teams against damaged Swarm Lord vessels. It was brutal work, fighting in cramped corridors against alien soldiers they barely understood. The Swarm Lords were tough fighters, well-trained and disciplined, but they'd clearly never encountered enemies as aggressive as human Marines. Frank's team took control of 2 enemy ships before having to pull back as the battle intensified. 6 hours into the fight, the situation was becoming desperate. The Third Fleet had lost 4 destroyers and 2 of the cruisers were badly damaged. The Swarm Lords had lost 19 ships but still had 28 combat-capable vessels remaining. They were closing in on the position where the refugee ships waited, protected only by the Valiant and a handful of damaged human warships. Captain Nash stood on the bridge, watching the tactical display. The numbers didn't lie. They were losing. In another hour, maybe 2, the Swarm Lord fleet would break through completely. He looked over at the communication station. "Send a message to all ships," Nash said quietly. "Tell them to prepare for Operation Final Stand." Admiral Voss understood what he was planning. Operation Final Stand was the last resort tactic in human naval doctrine. When victory was impossible and retreat meant abandoning people who needed protection, you made one final attack with everything you had left. You went down fighting, and you took as many enemies with you as possible. "Robert, wait," Voss said. "There might be another way." "Admiral, we're out of options. Not all of them." She pulled up a navigation plot on her screen. "The Swarm Lords are in a loose formation now, spread across the asteroid field. If we could hit their center hard enough, break their coordination completely." Nash saw what she was thinking. That would require a ship to go straight through their middle line. They'd tear it apart. Maybe. Or maybe they'd be too surprised to react effectively. Voss smiled grimly. "The Valiant is the most heavily armored ship we have. If we went full burn, launched everything we have, then pulled away at the last second, that's insane, probably. But it's the kind of insane that might actually work." Nash looked at his bridge crew. Young faces, some scared, all exhausted. They'd been fighting for 6 hours straight with no breaks. But when he asked if anyone objected to the plan, not a single person raised their hand. "All right then," Nash said. "Let's show these Swarm Lords what humanity does when we're cornered." The Valiant broke from the defensive line and accelerated directly toward the enemy center. Every weapon on the ship fired at once, filling space with missiles and railgun slugs. The Swarm Lord ships scrambled to respond, turning their beam weapons on the approaching cruiser. Energy bolts tore into the Valiant's armor, but the ship kept coming. At the last possible second, Nash ordered full reverse thrust. The ship shuddered and groaned but managed to change direction, pulling away from the enemy concentration. Behind them, the massive salvo of missiles reached their targets. Explosions rippled through the Swarm Lord formation. Ships collided as they tried to evade. The perfect coordination that had been their strength dissolved into chaos. The remaining human ships pressed their attack, exploiting the confusion. The armed Talveri vessels joined in, their lighter weapons finding targets among the damaged enemy ships. Suddenly the Swarm Lords were the ones being hunted, caught between asteroids with enemies coming from multiple directions. Vessel Commander Thorol made his decision. He ordered a retreat. The Talveri homeworld was nothing like Earth. The planet was smaller, with lighter gravity and an atmosphere rich in methane that gave the sky a permanent orange tint. Cities covered vast areas of the surface, but they were empty now, occupied by Swarm Lord forces who used them as administrative centers for their expanding empire. The real Talveri civilization existed in orbit, in the massive space stations that housed the government in exile and what remained of their military. Admiral Voss looked out at those stations as the Third Fleet limped into the system. The Valiant had taken severe damage during the battle at the asteroid field. Hull breaches covered 3 decks. The main reactor was running at 60% capacity, and the medical bay was overwhelmed with wounded. 4 ships had been lost completely, along with over 800 crew members. The victory had been expensive, but they'd won. The refugees were safe, and the Swarm Lords had retreated. News of the battle had spread quickly through whatever communication networks the alien species used. For the first time in centuries, someone had fought the Swarm Lords and forced them to withdraw. That meant something. A delegation came up from the nearest station to meet with Voss. They weren't all Talveri. Nicole Ward working on translation? identified 6 different species in the group. There were the insect-like Talvari led by Elder Shen, reptilian beings called the Dravix, with scales that shifted between green and blue, tall, thin creatures named the Solari, who communicated partly through scent, crystalline entities called luminaries whose bodies seemed to generate their own light. Each species had apparently been displaced or attacked by the swarm lords at some point. "Welcome to the Accord," Shen said, as she led the delegation into the Valiant's conference room. "That's what we call ourselves. 6 species who refuse to surrender. We've been coordinating our defenses and sharing resources for the past 20 years. Captain Nash studied the group with interest. "How many ships does the Accord have in total?" 42 combat vessels across all our species," answered one of the Dravix, an officer named Ren. His translator had a strange accent, almost musical, though calling them combat vessels is generous. "Most are converted civilian ships with basic weapons. Nothing compared to what we've seen your fleet do." Admiral Voss sat down at the conference table. "Then we should probably talk about cooperation. The Swarm Lords aren't going to forget about you, and they're heading toward Earth eventually. We have common interests." What followed was 3 days of careful negotiation and cultural translation. The Accord species were cautious, understandably wary of the aggressive humans who'd appeared out of nowhere with powerful weapons and a willingness to use them. Some of the representatives were openly disturbed by human combat tactics. "You destroyed ships without trying to disable them first," one of the luminaries said, its crystalline body pulsing with what Nicole thought might be distress. "You killed crew members who might have surrendered if given the chance." "They were shooting at refugees," Frank Hayes responded. He'd been included in the discussions to provide a military perspective. "We didn't have time for negotiations, but violence should always be the last option, used only when all other choices are exhausted. That's a nice philosophy. But sometimes the other side doesn't give you the time to exhaust all options." The debates continued, but gradually a picture emerged of how different humanity was from every other species in the Accord. Most of them had developed advanced technology without going through the kind of devastating wars that had marked human history. They had conflicts, certainly, but nothing like the world wars and nuclear exchanges that had nearly destroyed Earth multiple times. They were peaceful by nature, which made them vulnerable to an aggressive empire like the Swarm Lords. Paul Chen, meanwhile, was having more productive conversations with the Accord's intelligence specialists. They'd been studying the Swarm Lords for decades and had gathered information that filled in gaps in human understanding. The picture that emerged was complex. The Swarm Lords had started as a single species called the Ascendants, who'd conquered their entire home system before developing FTL travel. Their culture was built around the idea of perfect order and unity. They genuinely believed they were improving the galaxy by bringing other species into their organized society. Conquered peoples weren't enslaved exactly. They were given roles in the Swarm Lord hierarchy, treated fairly according to their abilities, and granted access to advanced technology. "It's not traditional conquest," Paul explained to Admiral Voss. "It's more like forced assimilation. They're building a multi-species empire where everyone has a place as long as they accept Swarm Lord authority. Except the species who refuse," Voss noted. "Except them. The Swarm Lords don't understand resistance. To them, refusing their offer is illogical. Why would anyone choose chaos and struggle over peace and order?" Paul brought up his expanded maps, showing the full scope of Swarm Lord territory and their expansion pattern. The route was even clearer now with the Accord data added to what he'd gathered before. They're definitely following the ancient pathways toward the Dead Zone. The Accord has reports of Swarm Lord archaeological teams excavating ruins on conquered worlds. They're searching for something specific. One of the Silari spoke up, their translator rendering their scent-based communication into words. "There are legends about the architects. They supposedly created technology that could reshape reality itself, control space and time, create or destroy entire star systems. We always thought these were just myths." "The Swarm Lords don't think they're myths," Paul said. "And if they find that kind of technology—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the room understood the implication. An expansionist empire with the power to reshape reality would be unstoppable. The negotiations continued. Admiral Voss proposed a formal military alliance. The Accord would provide intelligence, logistics support, and access to their territory. Humanity would provide military forces and advanced weapons technology. Together, they'd coordinate defenses against Swarm Lord expansion. "We need to be honest about something," Voss told the assembled representatives. Earth is new to space. We only developed FTL 15 years ago. Our territory is small, just a handful of colonies. But we have something you don't have. We know how to fight wars. Not skirmishes or raids, but total wars where everything is at stake. We're very good at it because we've had to be. Ren, the Dravik's officer, leaned forward. You're saying you're offering to fight a war for us. I'm saying we're offering to fight a war with you. The Swarm Lords are heading toward Earth. That means this is our war too. But we can't do it alone. We need your knowledge of the galaxy, your understanding of Swarm Lord tactics, your resources. In return, we'll show you how to actually hurt them when they attack. The vote took another full day. Species representatives consulted with their governments through long-range communication. Some were enthusiastic about the alliance. The Draviks, who'd lost 3 colonies to the Swarm Lords, were ready to sign immediately. Others were more cautious, worried about humanity's aggressive nature. In the end, the vote was unanimous. The accord would ally with Earth. The celebration was brief. Even as the treaty was being formalized, new reports came in from Accord scouts. The Swarm Lords were assembling a massive fleet at their forward staging area. Over 300 ships, including their largest warships that had never been deployed before. Intelligence suggested they were preparing for a major offensive. The target became clear when Paul cross-referenced the fleet's position with known strategic locations. They were positioning themselves along the route toward Earth. The Swarm Lords had apparently decided that humanity was too dangerous to leave alone. They were going to eliminate the threat before continuing their search for ancient technology. How long do we have? Captain Nash asked. The fleet will be ready to move in approximately 3 months. Travel time to Earth is about 3 weeks after that. Voss immediately sent a priority message back to Earth. The fastest ship in the 3rd Fleet, the destroyer Mercury, detached from the damaged formation and jumped to FTL, carrying complete intelligence reports and a desperate warning. Earth needed to prepare for the largest military engagement in human history. In the meantime, the 3rd Fleet would undergo repairs at Accord shipyards. The alliance was official now but untested. They'd need to learn to work together quickly because the coming battle would determine the fate of both human and Accord civilizations. Sarah Hayes had never expected to defend Earth from an alien invasion. She was a logistics coordinator, someone who made sure supplies got where they needed to go and that defense satellites had working parts. Her job was boring, administrative, the kind of work that kept civilization running without anyone noticing. That changed the day the Mercury arrived back in Earth's system, carrying Admiral Voss's warning. Suddenly, boring logistics became the most important job in human space. Every shipyard was converted to military production. Civilian vessels were retrofitted with weapons. Defense platforms that had been mothballed since the corporate wars were pulled out of storage and reactivated. Sarah found herself working 20-hour days, coordinating the defensive preparations across 3 planets and dozens of space stations. The problem was time. 3 months wasn't enough to build a fleet from scratch. Earth had maybe 30 military vessels in the home system, plus another 20 scattered across the colonies. Even if they recalled every ship and pushed every shipyard to maximum production, they'd have less than 90 vessels to face over 300 Swarm Lord warships. We're going to lose, one of the military planners said during a late-night meeting. We should evacuate as many people as possible and abandon Earth. Abandon Earth? Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. Where would we go? Our colonies can't support billions of people. Some people is better than no people. The debate raged in government chambers and military headquarters. Some argued for evacuation, others for a defense to the last ship. In the end, it was decided that Earth would fight, but preparations would also be made to preserve human civilization if the planet fell. Colony ships were loaded with genetic samples, cultural records, and volunteers willing to flee into deep space to rebuild elsewhere if necessary. The 3rd Fleet returned home 6 weeks before the expected Swarm Lord arrival. The ships looked terrible, still bearing damage from the battle at the refugee field. But they came back with something more valuable than pristine hulls. They brought Accord advisors, technical specifications for alien technology, and most importantly, they brought experience. They knew how to fight the Swarm Lords and win. Captain Nash was promoted to Commodore and given command of Earth's defensive coordination. Admiral Voss took overall command of the combined Earth Accord fleet. She established her headquarters on a military station near Luna, where she could see Earth hanging in space, a blue marble worth dying for. The Accord sent every ship they could spare. 40 vessels arrived over the following weeks, bringing the total defensive fleet to 98 ships. It still wasn't enough, but it was what they had. Mixed crews trained together, learning to coordinate tactics between species with very different approaches to combat. Nicole Ward found herself training Accord communication officers on how to work with human commanders. "Don't expect them to be polite in battle," she explained to a group of confused Tal'Vari. "Human commanders use what you'd consider aggressive language. It's not meant to be insulting, it's just how we communicate under stress." The Tal'Vari officer, whose name translated roughly as swift, looked concerned. "But aggressive communication leads to aggressive action. How do you maintain discipline?" "Our discipline comes from training and trust, not from polite language. When someone's shooting at you, you don't have time for please and thank you." The cultural gaps were everywhere, but slowly the mixed fleet learned to work together. Accord ships took positions in the defensive grid, where their precise long-range sensors could provide early warning. Human ships formed the strike groups that would engage the enemy directly. Everyone had a role that matched their strengths. The Swarmlord Grand Fleet arrived 2 days earlier than expected. Over 300 ships emerged from FTL at the edge of the solar system, near Neptune's orbit. They were led by a massive vessel that dwarfed everything else in space, a command ship called the Unity of Purpose. Supreme Vessel Lord Macron commanded the fleet from that ship, and his first action was to broadcast a message to Earth. "This is Supreme Vessel Lord Macron of the Swarmlords. The species known as humans has interfered with our operations and allied with rebel elements. This cannot be permitted. We offer one final opportunity for peace. Surrender your military forces and accept integration into the Swarmlord Society. You will be treated fairly and given appropriate roles in our civilization. Refuse, and we will eliminate your species as a threat to galactic order. You have 12 hours to respond." Admiral Voss's reply was broadcast on every frequency Earth possessed. "This is Admiral Helen Voss of the United Earth Defense Force. Humanity doesn't surrender. We don't bow to threats, and we sure as hell don't let bullies push us around. You want Earth? Come and take it. But I promise you'll regret showing up." The 12-hour countdown began. Earth's population watched from the surface as news broadcasts showed the distant enemy fleet beginning its advance into the solar system. Some people fled to bunkers, others went to churches, temples, mosques, anywhere they could pray. Many just went to work, trying to maintain normal life for as long as possible, because the alternative was giving in to fear. Sarah coordinated the evacuation of non-essential personnel from the orbital defense stations. Her brother Frank was somewhere in the defensive fleet, commanding marine units that would board any Swarmlord ships that got close enough. Her parents were in a shelter in Geneva, protected by hundreds of meters of rock and reinforced concrete. She couldn't protect everyone, but she could make sure the defense platforms were fully stocked and operational. The Battle of Earth began at Neptune. The Swarmlord fleet advanced slowly, cautiously, clearly expecting traps after what had happened at the refugee field. They found them. Human ships had seeded the outer system with autonomous defense drones that activated as the enemy passed. The drones weren't powerful enough to destroy capital ships, but they forced the Swarmlords to waste time and ammunition clearing them out. The first major engagement happened near Uranus. A strike force of 20 human destroyers, led by the rebuilt Valiant, ambushed the Swarmlord vanguard. The humans fought like rabid animals, breaking every rule of civilized warfare the Swarmlords knew. They rammed damaged ships into enemy vessels. They set reactors to overload and used the ships as improvised bombs. They took casualties that no sane military would accept, but they slowed the enemy advance. Commodore Nash fought from the Valiant's bridge, coordinating the destroyer group's attacks. They destroyed 8 Swarmlord vessels before being forced to withdraw, but the cost was high. 6 human destroyers were lost, including the Pacific II, named after the ship destroyed at the refugee field. Nash felt each loss like a physical wound. The Swarmlords reached Jupiter 3 days later. Admiral Voss had set up a major defensive line in the gas giant's gravity well, using the planet's radiation belts and dozens of moons for cover. The battle there lasted 18 hours and involved nearly every ship from both sides. Supreme Vessel Lord Macron adapted his tactics, splitting his fleet into multiple task forces that attacked from different angles. It was a sound strategy that forced the defenders to divide their attention. Human and Accord ships fought desperately, But the Swarm Lord's numerical advantage was overwhelming. The defensive line began to collapse. That's when Nash made his call. The Valiant was badly damaged, operating on backup power with fires burning on 3 decks. It couldn't fight effectively anymore, but it could still move. He ordered the crew to evacuate to support ships, keeping only essential personnel aboard. Then he aimed the Valiant at the Unity of Purpose and accelerated to ramming speed. "Sir, you'll never make it," his tactical officer said. "They'll shoot you down before you get close." "Probably, but I'm going to make them work for it." The Valiant charged across open space toward the Swarm Lord command ship, every remaining weapon firing. Dozens of enemy ships concentrated their fire on the cruiser, tearing it apart piece by piece. But Nash kept the ship on course using emergency thrusters to compensate as engines failed. The Valiant was falling apart around him, but it was still moving forward. At the last moment, Nash activated the reactor overload sequence and jumped into an escape pod. The Valiant crashed into the Unity of Purpose's shield and exploded with the force of a small nuclear weapon. The Swarm Lord command ship's shields collapsed and its hull took severe damage. Supreme Vessel Lord Macron was killed instantly when the bridge section depressurized. The Swarm Lord fleet fell into chaos without their supreme commander. Ship captains began making independent decisions, breaking formation as they tried to figure out who was in charge. The Human Accord fleet pressed their advantage, launching coordinated strikes against the disorganized enemy. But they were still outnumbered and exhausted. As the battle reached its 5th day, both sides had taken devastating casualties. The Swarm Lords had lost over 100 ships. The Human Accord Alliance had lost 60 vessels. Earth's orbital defenses were mostly destroyed. Cities on the surface had been damaged by debris falling from space. Over 10 million people were dead. Then something impossible happened. A massive energy surge appeared at the edge of the solar system. Ships appeared from nowhere, hundreds of them. But they weren't Swarm Lord reinforcements. These vessels were ancient, covered in symbols no one recognized, their hulls made from materials that didn't match any known technology. The automated defense fleet from the Dead Zone had arrived. The ancient ships didn't communicate. They simply began attacking both human and Swarm Lord vessels indiscriminately, treating everything as an intruder in their protected space. Their weapons were devastating, capable of cutting through shields and armor like they didn't exist. But then they seemed to analyze the situation more carefully. The ancient ships stopped firing on human and Accord vessels and concentrated entirely on the Swarm Lords. It was as if they recognized the Swarm Lords as the greater threat, the force that had been approaching the Dead Zone for centuries. The remaining Swarm Lord ships broke and ran. They jumped to FTL as quickly as they could calculate escape vectors, abandoning the fight entirely. The ancient ships pursued them briefly, then stopped at the edge of the solar system. They held position there for several hours, as if making sure the threat was gone, then disappeared back into FTL as suddenly as they'd arrived. The Battle of Earth was over. Humanity had survived, but barely. The final casualty count was staggering. 8,000 military personnel dead, including Commodore Nash. Over 10 million civilians killed by orbital debris and accidents during the fighting. Dozens of cities damaged. Earth's orbital infrastructure was in ruins, but they'd won. The Swarm Lord Grand Fleet was destroyed or scattered. The threat to Earth was gone, at least for now. Admiral Voss retired the day after the battle ended, too exhausted to continue. She'd done what she set out to do: defend Earth and forge an alliance with the Accord species. What came next would be someone else's responsibility. The memorial ceremony happened 3 months later, after the worst of the damage had been repaired. A massive monument was erected in orbit near where the Valiant had made its final charge. The names of every person who died defending Earth were carved into its surface. Representatives from all Accord species attended, standing alongside human military officers and civilian leaders. Kreen, the Talveri who'd been saved at that first colony, gave a speech that was translated into dozens of languages. He looked up at the monument, at the thousands of names inscribed there, and spoke the words that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. "We sent a distress signal hoping for rescue. You sent a war fleet. You didn't save us because it was easy. You saved us because it was right. That is what makes you dangerous. That is what makes you necessary. The galaxy needs species who will stand and fight when others would run, who will protect the weak even when it means facing impossible odds. We are honored to call humanity our allies. Earth began building a new fleet the next day. Not 12 ships or 30, but hundreds. The corporate wars had taught humanity to be prepared for conflict. The swarm lords had taught them that the galaxy was a dangerous place. Now Earth would be ready for whatever came next, and somewhere in the dead zone, ancient machines waited, their purpose still unknown, their creators still mysterious. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun.